They took all her clothes and left her for dead. "I'll take you home," said the mountain man. "Strip her bare, leave her for the wolves." The cruel laughter of Black Jack Morrison rang out across the frozen trail. Lantern light flickered against the snow as his gang circled the terrified woman like coyotes. Sarah Blackwood, a plump 25-year-old school teacher, clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her voice breaking as she pleaded, "Please, I'm only a teacher. I have nothing worth stealing." But her words only fed their amusement. "Look at the fat one," Black Jack sneered. "She hides plenty beneath those clothes. Let's see where she keeps her treasures." Rough hands tore at her garments, dragging the wool coat from her shoulders, the boots from her feet, until she stood trembling in the bitter wind, stripped of dignity as much as warmth. They found only a single keepsake, a gold watch once belonging to her father. Black Jack dangled it mockingly before tossing it into his pocket. "Not much of a prize," he spat, "but a lesson will do. Let the world find her frozen by morning. Let the crows peck her bones." The gang thundered off into the darkness, leaving Sarah shivering and half-conscious in the snow. Naked, defenseless, and abandoned, she staggered to the shelter of a pine tree, clutching handfuls of needles for cover. The cold bit into her flesh like knives. She curled against the trunk, lips blue, whispering through chattering teeth, "Lord, if I must die tonight, let me die with grace." The world blurred, her eyelids heavy, the deadly drowsiness of frost stealing her breath. Then hoofbeats, a lantern glow, a voice deep and steady, breaking through the night. "Hold on, I've found you." And from the shadows emerged a towering figure, a mountain man with the strength of a bear and eyes kind enough to melt the winter itself. The towering man dismounted from his horse with the quiet ease of someone who belonged to the wilderness. Tobias Hartwell, known in whispers around Deadwood Crossing as the Gentle Giant, knelt in the snow beside Sarah. His massive frame blotted out the icy wind, his shadow falling over her shivering form. "Sweet Lord," he muttered, stripping off his thick bearskin coat and wrapping it around her trembling shoulders. "Who could be cruel enough to leave a woman like this?" Sarah tried to speak, but her lips barely moved. "They took everything." Her eyes fluttered closed. "No," Tobias rumbled firmly, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "They won't take your life, not while I draw breath." He mounted his horse, settling her carefully in front of him, pressing her against his chest to share his warmth. Each breath of his fogged in the cold air, but his voice was steady as he urged the horse forward. "Stay awake. Talk to me. Tell me your name." "Sarah," she whispered faintly. "Seraphina Blackwood." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Sarah, I'm Tobias Hartwell. You'll be safe now." The ride through the night was brutal, the snow biting at his exposed arms where his coat no longer covered him, but he never loosened his hold on her. He spoke constantly, rough voice like a lifeline in the darkness. "There's soup waiting in my pot, a fire that never dies in the hearth. You'll sit by it tonight, you'll live." By the time they reached his cabin, Sarah was drifting on the edge of unconsciousness. Tobias carried her inside, his boots thudding across the wooden floor. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and leather, warm air hitting her frozen skin like salvation. He set her near the fire, fetching blankets, rubbing her arms to drive life back into her veins. When she stirred, embarrassed by her state of undress, he said gently, There's nothing to be ashamed of. They tried to strip your dignity, but they failed. You're still here." Sarah turned her face away, hot tears spilling despite the cold. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Tobias crouched before her, his green eyes solemn. "Because no one deserves to be left to die alone, and because—" He hesitated, as though unaccustomed to words. "I once lost a wife and daughter to cruelty I couldn't stop. I won't stand by and lose another soul." The weight of his confession hung heavy between them. Sarah searched his scarred, weathered face and saw not only strength, but grief carved deep. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, Tobias rose, stoking the fire higher. "Rest now. Eat when you can. You're safe in my home." For the first time since that nightmare on the road, Sarah believed him. Yet shame still gnawed at her helplessness, her exposed body, the laughter of the men who had mocked her weight. But Tobias's steady gaze never faltered. He did not see her as broken. He saw her as someone worth saving. And that, more than the fire or the soup, began to thaw the ice around her heart. The first days at Tobias Hartwell's cabin blurred for Sarah in a haze of warmth and exhaustion. She remembered waking by the fire, wrapped in thick quilts, the scent of wood smoke in her hair. She remembered Tobias's low voice coaxing her to sip broth, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he brushed damp strands of hair from her forehead when fever threatened. But recovery was slow. Her body bore the bruises of the gang's cruelty, and her spirit carried heavier wounds. Each time she closed her eyes, she heard their laughter, the words, "Fat one," slicing deeper than the cold ever had. Tobias never pressed her to speak. Instead, he gave her small tasks when she was able, stirring the pot of soup, folding the blankets, feeding the chickens outside the cabin door. "You'll heal faster with work," he said, though his eyes softened whenever she winced with effort. One morning, after the worst of the frostbite had faded, Tobias saddled his horse. "The hills are kinder now," he told her. "Ride with me. The air will do you good." Sarah hesitated, clutching the shawl he'd given her. I don't think I should. What if someone sees me?" He studied her for a long moment. "Let them. You've nothing to be ashamed of." And though shame still tugged at her, she mounted behind him, her arms circling his broad frame. They rode into the forest, the pines towering above like cathedral columns, snow melting into silver rivulets down the slopes. Birds chattered overhead, and for the first time since her ordeal, Sarah breathed without pain. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Tobias said quietly. "Yes," she admitted. Then, with a small laugh that surprised even herself, she added, "I never thought I'd live to see it again." He turned slightly, his eyes catching hers. "You will see many more, I promise." That promise wrapped around her tighter than the woolen shawl. As the weeks passed, their rides grew longer. Tobias showed her how to spot deer tracks in the mud, how to find dry wood even after a storm. He pointed out the curve of the ridge where the sun always lingered last, the clearing where he planned to build a second barn come summer. Sarah, in turn, began teaching him. In the evenings, when the fire roared and supper was done, she pulled out a tattered primer she found on his shelf. "You read well enough," she teased gently, "but your letters lean like drunkards." He chuckled, a deep sound that warmed her to the marrow. "Then straighten me out, schoolmistress." So she guided his hand over paper, correcting his pen strokes, smiling when he muttered curses at stubborn words. "Patience," she said softly. Even mountains are shaped a little at a time. In those quiet moments, the walls between them thinned. She no longer saw only the giant who had saved her, but a man scarred by grief, hungry for connection, and willing to learn again. He no longer saw only a woman wounded and mocked by the world, but someone resilient, intelligent, and unyielding in ways she didn't yet see herself. Yet shadows remained. Sometimes Tobias's gaze would drift to a carved wooden doll on the mantel, the last relic of his lost daughter, and his jaw would harden with pain. And sometimes Sarah would wake in the night, clutching the quilts around her body as the echoes of cruel laughter chased her from sleep. On those nights, Tobias would sit by the fire saying nothing, but keeping the flames alive until dawn. His presence was enough. The journey was not only up the mountain trails or across frozen streams, it was within themselves. Two souls broken by loss, stitched slowly back together by kindness, by work, by the simple act of sharing space in a lonely cabin. And though neither spoke the word love, it bloomed quietly between them, like the first green shoot pushing through the last snow. By the time the spring thaw reached Pine Ridge, Sarah had found her rhythm within Tobias Hartwell's world. What had begun as recovery turned into routine. The cabin, once just a refuge from death, became something far warmer, almost a home. Every morning Tobias rose before dawn, his heavy steps moving quietly so as not to wake her. She would hear the crack of his axe outside, the rhythmic thud of logs splitting for the day's fire. By the time she stepped from her small room, hair braided neatly under her bonnet, he was already at the table with a pot of coffee steaming between them. "You sleep easier now," he observed one morning, pushing a mug toward her. "I dream less," she admitted. "Or if I dream, it isn't always of them anymore." His gaze lingered on her face, as though silently measuring her strength. Then he nodded, as if satisfied. The cabin was rough-hewn, but sturdy. Its walls held the scent of pine and smoke, its shelves stacked with tools and pelts from Tobias's work as a trapper. At first, Sarah had felt awkward among such rugged surroundings, her plump figure moving cautiously as though afraid to break something. But gradually, she found her place. She swept the floor each morning, humming softly as she worked. She cooked what food Tobias brought back from the woods, her soups and stews filling the room with familiar comfort. And when the first wildflowers bloomed, she gathered them to place in a tin cup on the table, brightening the cabin with color. Tobias noticed everything. Though he rarely said much, his actions spoke. When her hands chapped from hauling water, he brought her salve made from bear fat and herbs. When her dress tore, he left a bolt of cloth on her bed without a word. And each evening, without fail, he made sure the fire was stacked high so she would never feel the cold creep in again. For her part, Sarah began to see beyond his size and scars. She noticed the gentleness with which he brushed his horse's mane, the patience in his voice when teaching her how to set a snare, the way his eyes softened when she laughed. He could be stern, even gruff, but never cruel. In his presence she felt seen, not mocked. One evening she tried to repay him. "You've given me too much," she said, setting a loaf of fresh bread on the table. He frowned. "Bread isn't repayment. It's food." "I mean everything," she insisted. "Your coat, your home, your care." His blue-green eyes met hers, steady. "I didn't save you for payment, Sarah. I saved you because it was right, and because—" He hesitated, clearing his throat roughly, because no one should suffer alone, not you, not any more. Her throat tightened. Words failed her, so she simply reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His calloused fingers curled gently around hers, and for a long moment neither moved. As days turned into weeks, the bond between them deepened in small, quiet ways. He showed her how to shoot a rifle, his large hand steadying hers as she aimed at a target nailed to a tree. "Breathe with the wind," he murmured, his chest brushing her back. She hit the mark, and his smile, rare and fleeting, lit his face in a way that made her heart race. In return, she taught him patience with letters. Each evening, they sat by the fire, her guiding his hand across paper. His writing grew steadier, his reading clearer, until one night he surprised her by reading aloud a psalm she had chosen. His deep voice stumbled over a few words, but carried such reverence that tears filled her eyes. "You see," she whispered, "even mountains can be shaped." "And even teachers can be wrong," he teased gently. This mountain needed only the right hand to guide it. The cabin became more than shelter. It became a sanctuary where laughter began to creep in, where silence was no longer heavy, but comfortable. Tobias carved small wooden figures for her, leaving them on the mantel. Sarah sewed curtains for the windows, their simple patterns bright against the log walls. Together they stitched a life from the ruins of their pasts. Yet beneath the warmth, shadows lingered. At times, Sarah would still startle at the crack of a branch outside, convinced the gang had returned. Tobias would still fall silent when his eyes strayed to the carved doll of his daughter resting on the shelf. But when those moments came, they faced them together. Sarah, with a gentle touch on his arm. Tobias, with his steady voice reminding her, "You're safe here, with me." And in that cabin, on that mountain, love, tentative and unspoken, began to root itself in soil once hardened by loss. The peace of Pine Ridge could not last forever. By summer, the cabin had become a sanctuary of laughter and quiet labor, yet Sarah knew the world beyond still whispered about the fat school teacher who had been stripped, mocked, and left for dead. Each time she ventured into Deadwood Crossing for supplies, eyes followed her, some filled with pity, others with cruel amusement. "They should have left her there," she once overheard a ranch hand mutter at the mercantile. "No man wants a woman like that, except maybe that giant up on the ridge." Sarah kept her chin high, but the words sank like stones. That night she confessed to Tobias as they sat by the fire. "I hate that they see me only for my body," she murmured, "as if the cruelty I endured was somehow my fault. I feel marked, Tobias, marked by shame I never asked for." He set down his carving knife, his green eyes burning steady. "You are not marked by their cruelty. You are marked by survival. They tried to break you, and you lived. That makes you stronger than they'll ever be." His words steadied her, but shadows still crept at the edges of their lives. One afternoon, as Tobias returned from the trading post, his jaw was tight, his voice low. "I heard news in town. Black Jack Morrison rides again. He and his men are near the borderlands robbing stages. Folks whisper he's looking for the one that got away." Sarah froze, her heart hammering. "Me?" Tobias's silence was answer enough. That night she tossed in her bed, visions of lantern light and mocking laughter tearing through her sleep. At last she rose and found Tobias still awake by the fire, sharpening his rifle. "I can't let you risk yourself for me," she said, voice trembling. If Blackjack comes here, he'll kill you too." Tobias looked up slowly. "You think I fear death?" His tone was calm, almost weary. "I've faced it before, but I will not fear him, and I will not abandon you." Tears filled her eyes. "You already saved me once. I cannot ask you to fight my battles too." "You don't have to ask," he said simply. "I swore the night I found you I'd never let harm touch you again. That vow is mine to keep." Yet Tobias carried shadows of his own. When Sarah pressed him about the doll on the mantel, the carved toy he often stared at, he finally told her the truth. "My wife and daughter died 10 winters ago. A raiding party came while I was away. I came home to ashes. Since then, I lived only for survival. No home, no joy, until you—" Sarah touched his arm gently. "You blame yourself." He nodded, voice thick. "Every day. But when I look at you, I begin to think maybe God isn't finished with me yet." Their confessions bound them closer, yet also deepened the stakes. For both knew Blackjack was still out there, circling closer, a vulture unwilling to let his prey go. One evening, while tending the garden they had planted together, Sarah saw movement at the edge of the woods, a flash of a rider watching before disappearing into the trees. She ran inside, breathless. "They've found us," she whispered. Tobias's face hardened, but his voice was calm. "Then let them come. This cabin is no stranger to storms." Still, as he began shoring up defenses, reinforcing shutters, laying traps along the trail, Sarah felt the old terror return. She was no longer the helpless girl left to freeze on the roadside. Tobias had taught her to shoot, to stand, to believe in her worth. But could she truly face the men who had stripped her bare and laughed at her shame? In the shadows of Pine Ridge, past and present were colliding, and this time survival would demand not only Tobias's strength, but Sarah's courage as well. The attack came on a moonless night. Sarah had just finished dousing the lanterns when the sound of horses thundered up the ridge. Shouts split the darkness, ugly, mocking voices she recognized in her bones. Blackjack. Her blood ran cold. Tobias was already on his feet, rifle in hand, shoulders squared like the mountain itself. He glanced at her only once. "Stay low. Remember what I taught you." Before she could protest, the first shots rang out. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, splintering wood. Tobias answered with fire of his own, his rifle roaring in the night. "Come out, giant!" Blackjack's voice bellowed from the trees. "Hand over the fat sow, and we might let you crawl away alive." Sarah's chest seized with fury. The words that had once broken her now burned like fuel in her veins. She gripped the shotgun Tobias had placed by the hearth, her hands trembling but steady enough to cock it. The gang tried rushing the front, but Tobias had prepared. Spikes hidden in the snow maimed their horses, sending 2 riders sprawling. He fired again, dropping another who aimed too close. Through the chaos, Blackjack's laugh rang out, cold and merciless. "You can't keep her forever, Hartwell. She belongs to the cold and the crows." Something inside Sarah snapped. She rose from cover, flinging the cabin door wide, and leveled the shotgun at the shadows. "I belong to no one but myself," she shouted, her voice carrying strong across the clearing. A shot cracked toward her, but Tobias was faster. He barreled forward, his rifle flashing, and Blackjack stumbled from the trees, clutching his arm. Fury twisted the outlaw's face as he lunged again, pistol raised. Sarah pulled the trigger. The shotgun roared, its kick bruising her shoulder. Blackjack's weapon flew from his hand as he crashed into the snow, howling in rage. The gang faltered, their leader disarmed, their numbers halved, the rest scattered into the darkness. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the cabin fire and Black Jack's ragged curses. Tobias strode to where the outlaw writhed, towering above him like judgment itself. "You left her to die naked in the snow," he growled. "You'll hang for every soul you've wronged." The sheriff, alerted by gunfire and smoke, arrived before dawn with a posse. They dragged Black Jack away in chains, his jeers silenced at last. When the dust settled, Sarah sagged against the doorframe, the shotgun slipping from her hands. Tobias caught her, lifting her as though she weighed nothing, his chest heaving against hers. "You were brave," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "Braver than any man I've ever known." Sarah's tears fell freely, but her voice was steady. "You taught me to be." And in that moment, as the first light of dawn touched Pine Ridge, they both knew the fight had forged something unbreakable between them. The mountains were quiet again. Smoke drifted gently from the chimney of the cabin, rising into the pale dawn sky. Inside, the chaos of the night had given way to stillness. Sarah sat near the hearth, wrapped in a quilt, her hands still trembling from the weight of the shotgun. Tobias crouched beside her, cleaning the rifle with steady, practiced motions. When he finished, he set it aside and took her hand, rough fingers curling gently around her own. "You stood your ground," he said softly. "You faced the man who tried to break you, and you beat him." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but this time they weren't born of fear or shame. "For so long, I thought I was nothing more than what they called me, weak, fat, unworthy. But last night, when I stood beside you, I felt stronger than I ever have." Tobias's gaze softened, his voice rough with emotion. "Strength was always yours, Sarah. All I did was remind you of it." The firelight danced across their faces as silence settled between them, not heavy, but warm. Tobias shifted closer, his massive form casting a shield around her. "This cabin," he murmured, "was only walls and wood before you. Now it feels like home. If you'll have it, it will always be yours." Her lips trembled into a smile as she leaned against him, heart steady for the first time in years. "I already have it, and I already have you." Outside, the snow began to melt in glistening rivulets, feeding the earth with promise. Inside, two souls, once broken by cruelty and loss, rested in the safety of each other's arms. And in that quiet, hope bloomed like spring. Stories like Sarah and Tobias's remind us that even in the coldest nights and darkest hours, kindness can light a fire strong enough to save a life. She thought she had been left to die, yet she found not only safety, but love. He thought his days of family and hope were over, yet he discovered a reason to live again. Where are you listening from tonight? Do you believe, like I do, that love often comes when we least expect it? If so, stay with us, because the next story waiting ahead is meant for you.